Before Babe Ruth became Babe Ruth, there was a 6'6", 300-pound monk who could hit a baseball one-handed over buildings. His name was Brother Matthias, and almost no one has heard of him. Ruth would later say he was born as a hitter the first day he saw this man swing. He copied Matthias's grip, his stance, his pigeon-toed run, even the way he held his shoulders when he walked. The swing that changed baseball, the uppercut that murdered the dead ball era and invented modern power hitting, came from a Catholic brother in a black cassock standing in a reform schoolyard in Baltimore. Ruth called him the greatest man I've ever known. Not a teammate, not a manager, not any of the giants he encountered in his extraordinary life. A monk who never played professional baseball, who never left Baltimore, who died in obscurity while Ruth became the most famous athlete on earth. This is how it happened. On June 13, 1902, a Friday the 13th, a 7-year-old boy named George Ruth was escorted by a Baltimore police officer to St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys. The full name of the institution told you everything: St. Mary's Industrial School for Orphans, Delinquent, Incorrigible, and Wayward Boys. The paperwork on George listed him as incorrigible, beyond control, beyond reform, beyond hope. His parents ran a saloon on West Camden Street near the Baltimore waterfront. His mother Katie was sick, worn down by pregnancies that mostly ended in dead infants. George and his sister Mamie were the only 2 of 8 children who survived past infancy. His father worked 18-hour days behind the bar, and George, loud, wild, already chewing tobacco at 7, ran the streets like he owned them. He stole from his father's cash register, threw vegetables at truck drivers, hid in alleys, fought other boys, refused, absolutely refused to go to school. I was a bum when I was a kid, Ruth would admit decades later. I honestly don't remember being aware of the difference between right and wrong. St. Mary's was a gray fortress on a hill at the edge of the city. 5 stories of faux medieval stone, iron gates. 800 boys lived behind its walls, more than half of them sent there by courts. They woke at 6, slept at 8, ate oatmeal from wooden bowls in silence, marched in lines, learned trades in workshops, and discovered quickly that obedience was the only currency that mattered. The brothers who ran the place wore black cassocks with crosses sewn onto their chests and heavy rosary beads hanging from their belts. They carried leather straps. They used them. George Ruth would spend 7 of the next 12 years inside those walls, in and out. His parents would retrieve him, try again, fail again, send him back. They visited sometimes, then less, then almost never. "I guess I'm too big and ugly for anyone to come to see me," he told a younger boy named Louis Leisman on one visitorless Sunday. "Maybe next time." Next time never came. The man in charge of discipline at St. Mary's was a giant. Brother Matthias Boutelier stood 6 feet 6 inches tall and weighed somewhere north of 250 pounds. Some accounts say 300. He had pale blue eyes, blonde hair, sloping shoulders that descended into a heavy body, and a face that could go cold enough to freeze a room. He was shaped, one observer noted, something like a pear, but no one laughed. The boys called him the boss. He never yelled, never ranted, never lost control. When 800 boys erupted into a full riot in the yard one afternoon, fists swinging, bodies piling, Matthias was summoned from off campus. He arrived, walked calmly through the chaos to a small rise in the center of the yard, climbed up, folded his arms, and simply stood there, staring, silent, waiting. The fighting stopped, without a word. That was his power. Not violence, though he was strong enough to dive into a brawl, pull out a struggling teenager, and tuck the kid under one arm like a bag of laundry. His power was presence, the absolute certainty that he was in control and that fighting him was pointless. The boys feared him, but they also trusted him. His punishments were swift, consistent, and fair. When a punishment was over, it was over. No grudges carried forward. No cruelty held in reserve. No favoritism. He gave everyone a fair break, one former inmate remembered. But brother, if you ever crossed him, you sure were in trouble. For a child who had known only chaos, a drunk father, a dying mother, a home above a saloon where fights broke out and glasses shattered, this was revolutionary. George Ruth had never met anyone like Brother Matthias, and Matthias, somehow, saw something in George. Every Saturday evening after supper, word would spread through St. Mary's dormitories. Brother Matthias was going to hit. 500 boys, sometimes more, would gather in the upper yard. They'd crowd together, jostling for position, watching the entrance, and then Matthias would appear with a fungo bat, a light fin bat used for practice, and a bucket of baseballs. He would stand at the bottom of the yard, toss a ball into the air with his left hand, and with his right hand alone, one hand, he would swing. The ball would rise, and keep rising until it seemed to disappear against the sky before falling like a snowflake somewhere in the far reaches of the yard. Then another, and another, balls raining down across the entire field while boys scrambled and dove and shouted. What seemed like an effortless motion, Brother Thomas Moore Page remembered decades later, up and up the ball seemed to soar, almost out of sight, and when it came down there was a mad scramble for it. At the end, Matthias would hit them rapid fire, one after another, until baseballs fell across the yard like snow. Ruth watched this, a homely, overgrown, unwanted kid standing at the edge of the crowd. He was not yet 10 years old. He had no family that wanted him, no future anyone could see, nothing but a nickname. Nigger Lips, the boys called him for his broad features, and a reputation for trouble. But watching Brother Matthias hit baseballs one-handed into the Baltimore sky, something locked into place. Ruth didn't just admire Brother Matthias. He studied him, he shadowed him, he copied everything. He copied the one-handed fungo swing, the upward arc, the follow-through that generated impossible lift. He copied Matthias's short, pigeon-toed stride when he ran. He copied the way the big man carried himself through the school, calm, unhurried, certain of his place in the world. Matthias noticed. You couldn't miss Ruth. He was bigger than other boys his age, louder, more present, and he could hit a baseball farther than anyone at St. Mary's had ever seen. Matthias began to work with him. Hour after hour, when both had time, the monk would hit ground balls to the boy, hundreds of them, teaching him to field, refining the swing that Ruth had already stolen by watching. I could hit the first time I picked up a bat, Ruth said later, but Brother Matthias made me a fielder. What Matthias really made him was something else entirely. He gave George Ruth, a kid the world had thrown away, a kid whose own parents couldn't stand to keep him, the only father he would ever truly have. The structure Ruth accepted for the rest of his chaotic life came from this man. Not rules imposed from outside and resented, something deeper, an internal voice that said, this is how a man carries himself. This is how a man earns respect. This is the standard. Ruth would break every rule baseball had. He would drink and eat and chase women with legendary abandon. Managers would fine him, commissioners would suspend him, but he never stopped measuring himself against Brother Matthias. That voice, the one Matthias planted in a desperate boy, became Ruth's internal compass. Not a set of restrictions he resented, a standard he aspired to, something he measured himself against in quiet moments when no one else was watching. That kind of internal voice doesn't appear by accident. It has to be built deliberately, reinforced through repetition until it becomes automatic, until it speaks even when you don't consciously summon it. If you want a structured way to build that daily practice, there's an app called Affirmations, link in the description. Now, what happened when Ruth finally walked out of St. Mary's gates for the last time? In February 1914, a scout for the Baltimore Orioles came to St. Mary's looking for pitchers. He signed George Ruth on the spot. Ruth was 19 years old. He had spent the majority of his childhood behind those iron gates, and now he was leaving, for good. Within 6 years, he would be the most famous athlete on earth, the man who hit 54 home runs in 1920 when no one else could hit 15. The man who hit 60 in 1927 and shouted as he rounded the bases, 60! Count 'em, 60! Let's see some other son of a bitch do that. He became the Sultan of SWAT, the Bambino, the name that defined American sports for a generation. But he never forgot where the swing came from. Ruth visited St. Mary's throughout his career. He brought teammates to meet the brothers. He staged exhibition games. He raised money when the school needed it. In 1926, at the height of his fame, making more money than the President of the United States, Ruth bought Brother Matthias a Cadillac, $5,000, a small fortune. When that Cadillac stalled on a railroad crossing and was destroyed by a freight train, Ruth bought him another one. He was the greatest man I've ever known, Ruth told reporters. He said it often, to anyone who asked about the origins of his swing, his success, his life. The greatest man Babe Ruth ever knew was not Lou Gehrig, not Miller Huggins, not any of the titans of industry or politics or entertainment he encountered in his extraordinary journey. It was a monk who hit baseballs one-handed and never raised his voice. Ruth's appetites became legendary, the food consumed in quantities that defied biology, the women, the drinking, the money spent as fast as it came in. Sports writers called him an animal. His teammates watched in awe and alarm. But Waite Hoyt, who played beside Ruth for a decade on those great Yankee teams, saw something else beneath the excess. A feverish desire to play baseball, Hoyt wrote, and a need for intimate affection and respect. Brother Matthias gave George Ruth a swing, a stance, a way of carrying himself through the world. He gave him the only structure his wild soul would ever accept. What he couldn't give him, what no single person could ever give him, was enough.